Hello and welcome to this month's coffee break for September. My name is Andrew Miller, your host as always. I'm joined this month by Hector Monsegur. I've been working on saying your last name right. I think I got it right. Thanks so much for being with us today, Hector.
I think it's right. You're good.
Yeah, thank you. The topic today focus is ransomware and resiliency architectures, a former hacker's perspective. Before we dive into that, though, as always, this is a series. From a coffee break standpoint, we've been doing this actually coming up to almost 3 years now. If you see any of these that you would be interested in, it's why I always go and put this in. We've done ones previously with Andy Stone and everybody else. So I'm even going to toss in the one from last month in case you missed data center fatigue, need a cloud bridge, make the cloud fit your business. But these are all available on demand. You can also find these on the Pure Storage website, purestorage.com/events, both previous ones and future ones. There is, of course, the matter of a drawing that we'll be doing at the end for an Ember mug. That's about retail value of $130, the kind you can control with your phone because it's interesting and cool and actually maybe useful too. My wife actually uses ours because she's a tea drinker and drinks it slowly over time. And of course, if you're one of the first 1,000 participants, we'll be sending you a $10 coffee e-gift card within the next week. That's for attending. There are some folks, some categories, you know who you are, where we can't send these gift cards to. And thank you for joining us regardless. As always, I am your host, Andrew Miller, and I try not to introduce myself every time. Thinking about this topic, I was going back to when I was actually before high school even, and was using ResEdit on a Mac to change the welcome to Macintosh screen to be very afraid to try and scare your mom. This is what little kids do when they're messing around with computers. Or even the time that, I was newly hired in IT operations and the new security guy scanned the mainframe with Nessus and crashed it. Or he'd scan that subnet, and I felt really lucky because I'd been playing with Nessus the week before, and I hadn't done that. So I felt like I got out of a jam, and he got in trouble. Joined this month by Hector. Hector, we're going to do a whole lot more about your biography here, but do you mind briefly introducing yourself as we're getting going?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Hector Monsegur. I'm a director of research for I would say it's a security company out west. I've also advised for a bunch of startups, and I'm kind of all over the place. I'm a jack of all trades when it comes to security, really. I am a former black hat, and not to glorify that, but at one point I was the bad guy, right, the bad actor, but I'm mostly a researcher. I like to, researcher and practitioner. I have a lot of, I guess, interest in learning how things work and how they break and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from the Lower East Side, or Alphabet City of New York City. For those of you that are in New York now, you would know that Lower East Side has changed. It's no longer, doesn't include Alphabet City anymore. So now Alphabet City is East Village. Fun fact for folks that have been there in the 80s, and maybe confused as to why it's not, they don't have an association anymore. I would say I started kind of learning about hacking and security back in the mid 1990s. It was really inspired by a bunch of films that came out during that time. I'm sure, Andrew, you remember.
We got a poll question on those, actually. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I can't wait to see the responses on that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I basically, kind of started out of curiosity and got into security again, out of curiosity. I was very innocent minded when I started. And then at some point I took a left turn and I got into hacktivism, and we'll probably touch into that a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's kind of who I am these days.
Awesome, thank you. And we're gonna come back and mention the co-host of Hacker and the Fed podcast. So there's you can already see a little bit of the feel of the story there. Before we dive in this month, though, as this is a series, we've got an interesting kind of two-part, maybe a two-for complementary. This month, focusing with Hector on ransomware resiliency architectures, almost kind of externally looking at threats. Next month, going to have Ratinder, VP at Pure Networking and Security Engineering, discussing DevSecOps, about how you build secure products, how Pure builds secure products. So it's actually a neat kind of complementary thing. That even lines up well with, if you're joining us this month, you probably are aware that next month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. There's multiple events that Pure is running. Thanks, Emily, for putting the link to the next month's coffee break in the chat. But it's not just that. If anything, we're like, man, are we doing too many? Well, it's the month of cybersecurity. We ought to do a bunch of stuff. So digging deeper into data resiliency, both from a tech talk standpoint, that's more deep technical thing. There's going to be a flash group focused around it, even an Engage event that actually has a coach of Tiger Woods. So you have industry folks that we know that are famous people paired up with some technology content to make for a fun event. By the way, the Engage event this month, if you want to join, if you like Coldplay tribute, you want to talk about, not having to deal with technical debt, turn up the volume on storage as a service. That is actually coming in, like 2 weeks or so from whatever today is. Sometimes I forget what day of the month, but you can see the information there. You can register. So with that, I think let's dive into looking at the agenda. As always, this is a little bit of a lightweight agenda, keeping it more conversational than heavy slides. So, and even a little bit of snark there, enough ambulance chasing already. Please let resiliency be more than a buzzword. And I don't know about you, Hector, like resiliency, I feel like it's become a buzzword, but it's a better than average buzzword, maybe.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, when it comes to this industry, I would say it tends to jump buzzword to buzzword. Resilience definitely seems like one. I mean, it makes sense. Some of
Meaning,
the I would say some of the buzzwords that we've seen in the past were for ideas, concepts, or products that weren't yet implemented or available yet. But resiliency is something that we could implement today. So that's a big difference.
perfect point. That's literally why I think it was like it's a buzzword, but there's some reality to it too. Okay,
Hmm.
so 4 parts, and as always, the first half, we're not going to focus on pure as much. That's the goal. So, going to start off with a little bit deeper version, even some kind of your history, Hector, and even that you were telling me the story of like you open the door and hello, it's me. When the FBI came knocking one time, they're like, really, it's you. So walk through a little bit of your history there. Then look at both your perspective and even some of what I've seen with Andy Stone and Jason Walker of the always evolving cybersecurity landscape. Change the only constant. Next, going into, well, we said it. It's why part of why I was up there. Resiliency architectures. Maybe this is a variation or an extension of defense in depth, but more than that. Being real, there's some things that Pure can offer here too, as well as, of course, Hector's perspective on the larger industry. And then last but not least, what's coming, both overall in the industry landscape, where you're focused, Hector, looking at Pure investments, because when we talk architectures, we have to have specific features and tactical depth that we're bringing to these areas for it to be true in reality versus just on PowerPoint. And please, as always, put Q&A into Zoom. We will be trying to end at around 45 minutes after the hour, give or take, and we'll stay around for Q&A. So put it in, and we have got Jason and Roger who can help with answering those questions, as well as we'll come back and revisit some of them live too. Before we dive in, let's kick off the first poll, if you don't mind, Emily. And for those of you who remember Emily, hopefully you do. Olivia actually had to be running around a little bit today, so Emily came back to join us. So this was a month actually where we like to do poll questions, as everyone knows, and it was a little bit harder because I didn't want to ask questions that feel awkward. Like sometimes you're in these meetings, Hector, and you've been saying like you don't want to call the baby ugly or call these problems because you want to help people, not in a way that antagonizes or makes them flustered. So tried to walk the line this month with the poll questions that are helpful without making anyone feel uncomfortable answering them. So, what's your favorite hacker movie? Um, Actually, do you want to answer that in advance, Hector, or do you want to wait and see what the crowd says? Because you were mentioning them
I'll
already.
Oh yeah, I'll answer that. So I'm really split between. You know what? I'm just gonna go with war games. I'm a fan of hackers and sneakers, but war games was the one that really inspired me to learn about word dialing, which kind of led me
Mm-hmm.
down this path. So
Mm-hmm. And
what about
then,
yourself?
do you or your company consider ransomware to be just where does it rank within your threat landscape? We've even been seeing some results from other surveys companies that we work with around this area. Just want to have a sense. So we will leave the poll open as we always do because, hey, you're maybe paying attention to something else or catching a quick bio break and you can do it in a minute. So maybe actually, Hector, let's just do a little bit longer if you don't mind of kind of how, and you started to go here of how you got into, no hacking. And you even mentioned kind of a left turn. Of course, this is never uncomfortable stuff, but what is your
Sure.
history and your background? So am I kind of walking through some of that and even like advanced persistent threats over to like China and Russia, I think. So let's turn it over to you. Just kind of go through some of that.
Yeah, sounds good. And like I said before, ladies and gents, I'm not here to glorify any of that. I think it's a very interesting story nonetheless, and I wouldn't take it back, right? These were all lessons that I had to go through, and I'm very happy to share with you today. Um, so let's start at the beginning. Let's start at your poll question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a point where I was a young boy, and I would watch a lot of films. And one of the films that I got to see that really piqued my interest was war games. specifically because there was two scenes in particular that I found interesting. One was the word dialing scene, where the main character would connect his modem to his computer, and then he would essentially call a bunch of numbers looking for live modem responses. I thought that was interesting. I want to learn about that. But the second thing was, and it's still relevant today, is, well, how do you bypass or circumvent a firewall?
Mm.
And War Games answers the question for you, because if you guys remember the movie details, there's a point where NORAD and like the Department of Defense, they shut down the Whopper system, the computer, or Joshua, right?
Mhm.
Well, what they do is they shut down incoming communication. They don't shut down outgoing communication. So Joshua, or the Whopper system, circumvented that by calling the main character back, thus mitigating that defense. So what and for those of you that are in the security industry, you may look at that like a reverse shell, a reverse connection,
Mhm.
right?
Reverse tunnel. Yeah.
A reverse
Reverse
tunnel.
SSH tunnel. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's where I learned that concept from that film. It was created in 1983. Fantastic stuff. But yes, no, I got into securities. Rather, I got on the internet back in 94, 95, and then I got into security as a concept by, I would say, the late 90s. So during those few years, I was learning how to use the internet, learning how to, meet some folks, make some friends. In fact, one of my friends is here with me today that I met from back then. And um, and then it was really about learning about well, web application security was really taking off at that time. In order for me, I'm not sure you guys remember this, but before you had PHP and like Node.js and all
Yep.
those really cool frameworks, you had something called CGI.
And
And so
Pearl
what
even underneath it sometimes. I think Pearl was getting called. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
What's up?
exactly my path, Andrew.
Yeah.
In order for me to break a CGI web application, I had to learn Perl. And sometimes I joke around, I say that Perl was my first love. It's the first language I got to play with and really spend a lot of time with. Now, so once I had, yeah, go ahead.
I used to have the O'Reilly Pearl book and the Regex
Yes.
book, and I kind of learned the Pearl book, and I had to open the Regex book every time I wanted to do something. So keep going.
Oh yeah, yeah. Perl was a fantastic language. It was just very ugly in syntax, but it allowed me to gain access to my first system. Um, and unfortunately, back then we didn't have a try hack me or hack the box. We didn't have cloud services that you could just deploy a VM and do some testing. In order to hack to learn, or rather, in order to learn to hack, unfortunately, you had to hack to learn. And so, my experience of kind of learning security was by breaking security. Okay. Now, okay, so that's like the beginning of the story. That's kind of where I got involved in
Mm-hmm.
cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was a point where in the mid to late 90s, you had another group called Cult of Dead Cow. We had some other old hacker groups in those days. But these guys really coined the concept of hacktivism. And hacktivism itself is when you take hacking and activism, you combine it together, and you kind of do an engagement. So I would say back then, it was less on destruction, Andrew, and it was more of like,
Just exploring and learning and taking something apart and putting it back together almost a little bit.
yeah. But if you're
Yeah.
doing like a hacktivist operation back then, instead of like breaking into a system and destroying it, you would like leave a defacement message. Remember, defacements were the big thing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know, so once I kind of learned how to administer these servers and be able to, even learn different vulnerabilities and attack vectors, I engaged my first hacktivist operation in 2000, and that was against the Puerto Rican government and the United States Navy for something that was happening in Vieques.
That feels ironic given where you are right now, by the way. We didn't
And I'm
plan
in
that out,
Puerto
but
Rico right now, so hopefully the government has forgotten my past transgressions. Um, but yes, so that was my first engagement. But really, where things took a turn, kind of changed my life, was in 2001. So I'm not sure if you guys remember this for the audience here. There was a point in 2001 where a U.S. spy plane and a Chinese jet had crashed.
mm-hmm.
And the U.S. spy plane had crashed onto one of the Chinese islands. And the Chinese government wanted a public apology from President Clinton of the time, or at the time. And the president was being hesitant on kind of giving a public apology. And so what it kind of did was create like one of the first, I'm gonna do this very hard emphasis on quotes here. One of the first cyber wars, right? I don't like that term, but uh, you had literally overnight, a group from China called the Chinese Hacker Union saying, hey, we're the biggest hacker group on the planet and we're going to destroy the American government. Okay. And they weren't completely wrong. Like within 36 hours, they were defacing and breaking into a ton of US government websites with Chinese messages of basically dissent and disrespect. Um, so, being patriotic in a way that I was, I said, okay, well, maybe I should start attacking the Chinese infrastructure because I have a little bit of skills. Maybe I could do something there. Um, and ironically, I wasn't recruited by an American. I was actually recruited by a Canadian hacker who worked with me over a period of like 6 months to break into Chinese infrastructure. And then we eventually somehow decided we should probably also break into Russian infrastructure while we're at it. And that kind of started my career as an advanced threat, or some may call it an APT, advanced persistent threat, mostly against the Russian and Chinese infrastructure for, I don't know, something like 10 years plus. Um, and, it was a wild ride. And by the way, here's my joke of the day, ladies and gents. The United States government was completely okay. Well, not okay, but they left me alone while I was attacking foreign governments. Here's where the left turn really comes into the conversation. Um, there was a point, and I'm sure you guys may remember this during the Iraq War, right? When it was the invasion of Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a story that came out that, federal contractors were feeding US soldiers these little plates of food. And it was like a piece of bread, some cheese and lettuce. And they were charging like $350 per plate. That upset me. That really upset me because
Personal level. Yeah.
because we have soldiers out in the desert. You're giving them a ham and cheese sandwich, and you're charging the taxpayer $350 a plate. No, uh, I turned my efforts on federal contractors, and that's what made me the bad guy here, for real, for real. And once I continued with that, eventually I had the knock on the door by the FBI, and yeah, it's history.
I think you even said like when you opened the door, there was a little bit of like, really, are you Sabu, kind of thing. You might mind ending with that story if that's all right.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I just want you to tee that off because I know that's a good part for you. The reality is that the FBI knew about me for a while. They're very good at what they do. They're investigators first. Okay, they're detectives. They're very smart folks, and they have a lot of tools at their disposal. Okay, so I'm sure they knew about me for at least a year before they knocked on my door. And when they knocked on my door, I had someone that's very close to me now. We're my best friends, Chris Tarbell, or back then it was Special Agent Chris Tarbell, and he was wearing like a pair of shorts and a bulletproof vest, like I don't know, like a half button down shirt. And he was
Quite the
like,
fashion statement, sounds like.
yeah, well, I gotta visualize it for you guys, right? Because whenever we watch FBI agents on TV in a film and a TV show,
Yeah.
they're always in suits. They look like robots, right? He was very human, and he was like, hey, so you're Sabu, right? I mean, we know you're Sabu. Um, you should probably come out here. And I'm like, yeah, it's me. There's no need for fuss. It's like, it's not that serious, guys. You know,
It's me.
yeah, it's me. I'm ready to deal with the consequences. So, um, but yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot more nuance to the story. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I kind of just want to just let you guys know that it wasn't a fiasco. It wasn't a big, crazy affair. The reason why Chris and I became good friends because he was a very nice man, and he was very realistic. And one of the first things he said, and I'll leave it here, Andrew. He said, Heck, you know, are you really trying to do 120 years for hacking? Like, do you think that's, you have a family. You should probably think about your family before you make any rash decisions. And that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of where we left off.
Mm-hmm. So I think with that, there's even some other you've done some other podcasts with this as well.
Oh
I
yeah.
think I'll point folks to those. But I think we're going to move into section number 2, and it's almost even as we're chatting, I talked. I was like, I want to let this extend to the whole time and talk about the history since then. But we'll kind of stick to the agenda. So, actually, if you don't mind, Emily, go ahead and close up, or Olivia, whoever's on the ball here, close up poll 1, and then we will share the results back out. So, for anyone who was wondering, oh, okay, I think we're good. Okay, actually, well, we launched poll 2 there. Is it Mm-hmm.
Oh, I
Let me see if I can go back here and I can tell people what poll 1 was. And so for poll one, war games came in first. I think we're a little too fast there, but and then 37% of folks see ransomware as a top 5 threat to their organization. 40% see ransomware as a top 3 threat. Only 5% actually see it as not a major concern, too much else to worry about. So obviously, it's a little bit of a selection bias here. You probably attended this if you think this event, if you think it's important. But actually, the Matrix and War Games tied, by the way, Hector. So
Really?
there you go. And
Well,
we got 6 write-in votes for the net. So
I love the net. And so I'm glad there's 6 write-in votes for it. Big shout out to those who voted for it. And by the way, the Matrix is very cool because if you guys remember, Trinity uses a SSH 0-day and Nmap. She used Nmap to identify SSH and then she uses a 0-day to break into the servers. So big shout out to Trinity for that.
I didn't even put this in my intro, but I actually used to do a lot with web hosting. So you use Nmap and even just basic stuff like trace on even Nessus, and even trying to figure out what's on the other end sometimes. And I just had security as a customer. Okay. Leaving poll 2 open, which is focused on. Okay, I'm getting too excited here, so I'm getting out of order. So poll 2, you can see it right now. Have you seen firsthand? This is where I was trying to be careful about what I'm asking you. So if you're not comfortable answering the polls, don't feel pressured. Have you seen firsthand the impact of a ransomware attack once or multiple times or no, or maybe just no comment? It's fine. And then who would you say, and this is a hard one to me, who is most on the front line? Every one of these folks we listed, and maybe more on the front line, but in various ways. But in your opinion, who's most on the front line? There's a little bit of a perception reality kind of question. Going to section number 2, though. So let's think about a little bit about the larger landscape because it is always evolving. I think if you're either in IT, it's either because you have a little bit of ADD or you just enjoy new stuff. If you don't, eventually it gets too tiring, kind of things. That's IT in general, but it's cybersecurity too. So maybe actually, Hector, if you don't mind, let me toss it back to you. What do you see as the current state of the security market, especially as it relates to ransomware?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Because of the kind of work that I do, I've had to dedicate a lot of time in researching ransomware malware samples. With one of my partners alone, we were looked at something like 500,000 malware samples that were reverse engineered and broken into small little chunks. And from that, you learn a lot of things. You learn about the different techniques and tactics and procedures being used by these bad actors, and that's very useful. But let's talk about what's affecting clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have clients that are being affected by ransomware substantially. And ransomware is not really going anywhere. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You have
Since,
issues. You have
since 2010, but it's still
oh
effective,
yeah,
which is crazy.
oh yeah. Well, even going further back, like one of the first ransomware campaigns that ever happens, um, it couldn't really. I don't think it was effective because it did not rely on cryptocurrency. It did not exist back then.
Mm-hmm.
But it used like something like PayPal or snail mail. I mean, you guys remember going back to the 80s, there used to
Yep.
be a virus that would ask you to send a check
Mm-hmm.
to an address.
Mm-hmm.
But since 2010, with the advent of Bitcoin and alternative cryptocurrencies, it allowed for these attackers to actually monetize their compromises. A lot of hacks were being done before then, but folks would just stay on their access until they could monetize in some way. But yes, unfortunately, ransomware, because of the human element, and we could talk about that all day, because of lack of policy and or policy enforcement, we could talk about that as well. You have a lack of kind of dealing with your asset management and even endpoint controls, right? There's a lot of great tools, and I would have to say the difference between 2010 and today, where we stand today, there's been a lot of really good tools and products and solutions. Some of them are cheap, some of them are not. Others are free, some are open source. There's a lot of creative minds working on solutions to the big problem or set of problems. But unfortunately, due to many reasons, we still kind of find ourselves in the same position as we were back in 2010. And in reality, it might be like that until we have more of these discussions, like this discussion right here. I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping the audience has a lot of takeaways, and I'm hoping that the audience can go back to their company and say, okay, look, we need to look at our security posture and our policies and how we're doing things to try to mitigate an attack before the attack happens, if possible. Okay.
So
Um, yeah,
there's actually one thing I want to go there to even. So MFA,
yeah,
that's often talked about.
Mhm.
Is it bulletproof, or if it's not, why? Because I'm sure that's something that's hopefully top of mind for folks on the call with us today.
Yeah, so MFA is fantastic, right? I love MFA. I would recommend it. All of you, incorporate some sort of MFA. Unfortunately, it's not bulletproof, and it all depends on how you deploy multi-factor authentication. Okay, I'll give you some examples of bad implementations if you guys don't mind, right?
Right?
So, you would argue that enabling multi-factor authentication in general is very useful, even if it uses SMS as kind of a
Mm-hmm.
method of kind of getting a code and then inputting that code into your application. Here's the problem with SMS. SMS is a plain text protocol. Okay. Yeah, it can be also referenced as two affairs, so
Yeah.
commented by Marshall.
Uh-huh.
Big shout out to Marshall
Sure.
for that.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, even though at the very least you have a MFA implementation, but if you're being targeted by a foreign actor with access to a rogue telecom, they could do a SIM swap. They could intercept your text messages. They could theoretically get that code, and then if they have your password, they could just log in as you, right? So that's a bad implementation. It's something, but if you're aware that there are potential risks to the implementation, then now you can start to improve or even change how you do it. I'll give you another example, Andrew. I'm sure you probably heard of this, right? There we go. Seth just said it right into the chat. Push, right?
That's amazing.
Push to push or MFA fatigue, right? And that is
Mhm.
when you have an MFA implementation where in order for you or the account to get logged in, okay, there has to be some sort of push notification set to your mobile device. Um, if there's no limits to that process, meaning that you could do it over and over and
Ding,
over,
ding, 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 ding.
mhm,
Yeah.
then you're basically doing a denial of service against the user, the victim. Eventually, they might hit yes, okay? Or they might even hit yes by accident, just opening the phone. So they call it MFA fatigue. So Julie just wrote multi-failure authentication. That's right. Um, so those are examples of bad implementations, right? They're better than nothing, okay?
Mhm.
And if you have to implement it that way, make sure it's temporary. You want to be able to verify your push notifications. You want to be able to have some sort of validation. Other people like to use codes right from your phone or mobile device. I myself and my company, we use secure tokens, or rather security keys. And there you go. And Matt just said in the chat, FIDO2 security keys
Mhm.
are the move, and that's exactly what I use. And Mr. Widget as well said Ubico, etc. So yeah, so MFA works. It works very well. But ladies and gents, I want to really also, and it's not to scare you, but even with the most advanced implementation you could do using FIDO2 keys, with off authentication, etc., there are still attack paths, right? Attack paths that can be leveraged by the attacker, especially if you have zero endpoint technical controls. Because then what an attacker can do, assuming they're able to compromise your laptop or your workstation, they could just grab your authentication session cookie from your web browser and authenticate, or rather use that session cookie on another browser and log in as you, completely bypassing the entire process,
Mhm.
right? But that's a conversation for endpoint security when we get to that point.
I think maybe I think we'll get into this a little bit. Maybe last question here. I'm always watching time. We're keeping it loose, but yeah, I'm watching time to make sure we hit on what we promised. So maybe in the ransomware space, a lot of attackers aren't technical, or at least from what I've seen, is even conversations in Estonia. Many are almost sometimes more business types.
Sure.
What do you see there as far as kind of the mix of business and technical, and even the reason for that too?
Yeah. So let's look at a ransomware group very quickly, right?
Mm,
Most ransomware groups right now utilize delegation. So you may have people that are focused on operations, meaning setting up infrastructure, putting a website together. You have others that deal with support. Those are people that actually negotiate ransoms with victims, unfortunately, which I don't know how anybody does that job. I would feel so bad, right? Um, but then you have the initial access brokers, the IABs. These are the guys that 20 years ago were doing what I was doing, which is scouring the internet, looking for targets, compromising networks, and they'll sit there. At least back then. Now, once these guys get certain access, let's say Active Directory access, um, you know, uh, you know, maybe privileged access, domain administrator access, then they'll take all of that information and sell it to a ransomware group. Okay. And we're talking about $1,500, maybe a little bit more, depending on the target, depending on the victim. And yeah, there's a lot of delegation. And in many cases, a lot of these groups are not run by technical folks. They really aren't. These are folks that are more on the business side, like you said, Andrew, than on the technical side. So are these guys super hackers? Not necessarily now.
And there's even, I mean, there's a piece of, I mean, I think you mentioned something about you built LulzSec doing the same way. It's just anytime something
Exactly.
grows, there's like a specialization, and you
Hmm.
break stuff off based on. If this is like classic businessy stuff, like attitude and aptitude, what people find interesting, what they're good at, and then stuff starts to split off that way. So the
Oh yeah.
that even I think answers a little bit of sometimes we hear about regular Fed takedowns, and it's like, why does
Hmm.
this have lasting impact? Because it's a little bit of a whack-a-mole. I mean, there's always people out there that will be willing to set ethics aside. They're opportunists.
Hmm.
So if you knock down one group, there's a void. Nature abhors a vacuum is actually how I think of it sometimes in many
Exactly.
ways. So there's an
Hmm.
opportunity there. And then you mix in the pieces about countries around the world. And even some of these have been successful enough they've retired off this too.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I
100%.
think anything else you want to add in here? Because man, there's so much. There always is, and I know some of what we chatted about ahead of time we left out here. But any final thoughts on kind of the current evolution of the landscape?
Yeah. So there are some things that people should be aware of. In fact,
Yeah, please.
we have Stefan. He kind of made a great point about the 0 days.
Yeah.
What
Such great
we've
comments in the chat, by the way. Keep those up, please, and keep going, Hector. I love the chat.
Yeah, great comments. I've been reading and just kind of, throwing them out there. I would say that the use of 0 days has been a lot more prevalent, more noticeable recently. It wasn't not even a couple of days ago when we heard about the new Pegasus malware strain affecting iPhones, the latest iPhones, using a zero-click vulnerability or exploit. So here's the thing, folks, right? 0 days are vulnerabilities that have not been patched or unidentified. Probably won't be patched for quite some time. Okay. There's not really much that we can do, to deal with a 0 day. If someone has a 0 day, which is basically like a master key right into your building, there's only so much we could deal with that. But there are some circumstances or some controls you can put in place to limit the damage. Okay. And
Blast radius. Yeah.
yeah, to limit the blast radius. The one thing I always tell folks, and this applies to anybody here today, what you can do at the very least is take your next lunch break with your team and sit down and say, okay, what's the worst case scenario if Bob gets compromised?
Mm-hmm.
How far,
Compromised admin.
oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and Bob could be an admin. What about Joe? He's been a network engineer for the last 15 years. He probably has access to everything, and he probably has policies that mitigates zero trust policies, right? He probably has full control. Well, when was the last time Bob changed his password? Hey, Bob, can you change your password? I mean, you don't have to admonish anybody, but even having those conversations are very similar to what we call in the industry a tabletop exercise. Let's talk about it. Let's analyze, and we can start to come up with solutions. Okay. So I'll leave it at that.
I love the highlight of tabletop exercise because sometimes tabletop exercise be like, oh, it has to be. Sometimes people jump right. It's this big consulting thing. It can be, and maybe it should be, frankly, but it
Sure.
could be internally done. It could even just be a series of conversations where you're starting to think through what would happen if,
Mm.
kind of thing. That's really what it is. And then we build process and reporting and structure around it, but that's the core. Okay.
Yeah. Let me
So
just put
let's go ahead.
one last point. So you brought up a good
Yeah.
point, right? That yes, you could bring in a third party vendor to help you with the tabletop exercise, but it's not required, at least not yet. If you guys are doing zero tabletop exercises, you could start now within your lunch breaks or dedicate some time to it. Take what
Mhm.
you learned there, and when you're ready to have a third party vendor come in and validate that stuff for you, you can. That's all. That's all, Andrew.
Oh, I mean, it's a thought process
Mhm.
or a kind of mental approach as much as it is like this official thing. It can be both, but that's where it starts. So, poll two, thank you for answering. We had actually 975 folks answer. So, the majority you're seeing these results here have seen one attack or multiple attacks. That almost gets us into 2/3, 63%. Some folks not comfortable commenting. So, hopefully, this is even useful for you as you're joining to get a sense of what your peers are seeing. And then who's most on the front lines? This was interesting to me. This was an even three-way split. Application teams lower, and that's where I think even some of what you were talking about, Hector, with application fuzzing and some of that,
Mhm.
that's the very front end. If you're not doing it at the human side of getting in, on the side door, be humans, but the network teams, storage, data protection teams, security, all all mixed up there. And I was wondering if you might see everyone's like, oh, it's a security problem, but that's not what folks are thinking or seeing. So that's actually quite cool to see because it is more than just a security team thing. Unfortunately, it would be nice and simple if it was, but it's more than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll stop sharing that one. And moving into section 3. And by the way, in case you didn't figure out, this is where like there's so much good stuff, and I was gonna just naturally let things go longer, so we'll accelerate here a little bit. But
Sure.
as we get into now, kind of what does Pure do, to be honest, but as well as with your perspective. So we started out by talking about resiliency as a buzzword, and there's stuff that we do from a Pure standpoint. What we're kind of calling resiliency architectures. Before I go there, do you mind kind of exploring a little bit, Hector, what resiliency means to you? Sometimes it's about security as life cycles. Maybe it's about prevention. Then it's all about recoverability, et cetera. But when you think about resiliency, you try and unpack that term in a legitimate, helpful way. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question for me, and mind you, I might have a different answer because I'm mostly on the offensive side of
We
research,
didn't
right?
script this part actually, so
Yeah.
hey.
So what's fantastic about me being in the position that I'm in, I'm able to listen to the resiliency concerns of clients from a whole bunch of different angles, from different industries, and kind of what they prioritize more, right? So let's talk about some of the points that I think that are interesting, at least from what I've learned. Um, we have organizations that may have developed some sort of policies, and those policies may not be enforceable because maybe there's a structure problem. Maybe the CIO, the CISO, and the security engineers are not really communicating well.
Mm,
And so, because you have that failure in structure, when it comes down to a breach, an incident, something happens, there's chaos. And I actually see that a lot. So, that really affects resiliency because at that point, if there is a complete
yeah.
fail of ongoing policy, um, then you may not even know who to call when a ransomware does hit, if it does hit. Okay. Um, so you have that. Another issue that we're seeing, that I'm seeing at least on my side, is a lot of organizations, they'll follow kind of like a blueprint. All right, we're going to set up a network, we're going to get this
Mm-hmm.
product, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
set up a backup solution, right? And some of these are really great or not so much, and then that's it. They'll connect a backup server to Active Directory on an internal network, and they'll set it and forget it, and they'll automate the backup process. But here's the issue: they don't have any, especially some of the things that you're going to talk about today, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any capabilities beyond what they're currently doing in terms of security and being able to kind of redeploy or being able to get back online in the event an incident happens. They're not really prepared for that. In most cases, if I'm able to break into Active Directory domain admin account, I have full control of the backup service. And
All
we've
bets
seen
are
that
off.
before. Oh, yeah, all bets are off. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot. And we've heard a lot of stories of breach companies where they're like, yeah, we had backup solution, but the attackers got access to it. Right.
Well, the whole what if, and this is a real story. A hospital got to make this super anonymous, where the storage admin, the day after he went on vacation, the attackers kicked off the attack,
Wow.
trashed the snapshots, trashed the backup servers. It turns out they pushed a keylogger to his machine because they compromised the help desk because they gotten on an individual person and dumped the SAM credentials, I want to say,
Yeah.
to get help desk credentials. So that's like a really hard attack chain. And the
Mm.
storage admin didn't do anything wrong in that discussion except like trust the help desk to update his machine. Maybe like that's what you're supposed to do. It's a policy thing. So especially there,
Mm.
and so resiliency architecture for Pure often focuses on kind of the last line of defense and even having multiple layers there. Like you were saying, like if you get Active Directory, is it like that's the holy grail and all bets are off? So this is actually super brief from kind of an approach standpoint, but we've taken kind of an evolution of what we believe is modern data protection. So modern data protection is not just backup, it's about restore. Like restore matters more than backup these days. Frankly, 10, 15 years ago was an era of backup windows are most critical. Now it's about restoring. So the idea that you would have multiple layers of protection within your last line of defense, and you'd have all of these protected by safe modes. So you might have primary data, longer term snapshot warehouses, even for like incident response analysis kind of thing. Of course, you need DR, but you don't want the attackers to be able to trash your DR setup if you need it. Maybe even all the way down to a data bunker scenario. This is where even this can be for us in partnership with a bunch of our other backup providers and partners. But when we layer in, especially the portability of data, data mobility between systems in efficient ways, and for different purposes, some is for fast recovery, some's for incident response, some is to accelerate SIMs. You got to be able to figure out how the attackers got in, what they got access to. And then, of course, safe mode. This isn't really meant to be a safe mode ad today because I'm hoping that most folks here know about safe mode. But the core problem safe mode solves is not immutability. Snapshots on Pure are already immutable. But if someone gets administrative access to a Pure system, can they do the final removal of data and basically blow everything up? Safe mode helps for that. Well, originally maybe it was a rogue admin, but really today in this scenario, which is really a compromised administrative scenario, and that's really, really hard to solve for. Any commentary on safe mode, Hector, before we jump into the final section here? Or even just both safe mode, because you're aware of some of this too. We've been working
Oh
together enough,
yeah.
as well as even just the rogue and compromised admin scenario. So back to you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is very important when you're able to. And I like the tiered approach because the one thing that we want to do, right? So we know
Mm-hmm.
there's 0 days, and we know that eventually there may be a breach. Worst case scenario might happen. Now, we want to make sure. Remember, if we're talking about like a ransomware group that they're monetizing their attacks,
Mm-hmm.
time equals money. Okay. Um, they're in I would say a group that has kind of a methodology, they have a kind of a blueprint on what they do once they're inside of a network. If they're running into hurdles when it comes down to breaching your backup solution or your current implementation, or they're not able to control backups after they realize, okay, there's a tiered system. If they realize it at all, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're definitely going to change their approach or kind of move forward, right? They might do a wipe-aware situation, but guess what?
Yeah.
You have a tiered solution in place. You have backups that are recoverable. And I mean, I think that what makes it, I'm always down for making it more difficult for any attacker to be able to have a successful attack. So big shout out to safe mode.
And this is a critical piece there, is
Yeah.
without, I've seen protections here that add so much operational complexity
Mm.
that you can't keep up with it, which is like, this is all great in theory, but I can't pull it off. So
Hmm.
even though we're showing, and I want to make sure to highlight here, kind of multiple layers,
Yeah.
this is layering on top of stuff that folks, either pure customers, do today, or you do in existing architectures, with a focus on operational simplicity. Now, obviously, that's a big promise. We're not going to cash that check today, but it is a focus on what we're going through here. Last poll, actually, before I do this, let me share back the results from. Oh no, we already shared the results from poll 2.
Yeah.
So actually, Emily or Olivia, if you don't mind launching poll number 3. So curious, because we're talking about recovery there. So I mean, you were talking earlier about MFA and endpoint protection. So we're not diminishing that at all, but focusing on some of the recovery pieces. So does your company focus as much on prevention as recovery, or is it a split? And then how many copies of data do you target for recovery purposes? Sometimes this is at 1, 2, 3, 4. There's even some old jokes about you don't need 1 copy of your data, you need 5 or 10, especially if you get into like dev test scenarios. You got data all over the place, and pointer-based snapshots help with that. We'll leave this open though as we go into the final section. And I know I promised at the beginning, we target usually kind of 45 minutes after the hour. We're going to bleed into that a little bit because I think I erred on the side of doing more in the front end section here with Hector, your background and just industry perspective, because I think that's helpful for folks. So
Sure.
let's move into the last section here of what's coming. Do you mind, before I jump into maybe kind of pure investments, do you mind starting maybe a little bit of an industry landscape, Hector, of kind of what things you see evolving in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say from the security perspective, you're going to see the use of AI in a lot of tools, and I think that's to be expected. I mean,
Mm.
I know a lot of companies that have been doing, AI work even before, like, people had access to GPT or ChatGPT and so similar. So there have been tools in development for quite some time. You're probably going to see more of that. Uh, Probably on the defensive side and detection. And you might even see a lot of that in continuous work. So you're definitely going to see more AI stuff there, and it's going to be interesting. Okay. What I would love to build one day is a platform where you can look at, let's say, your last 10 pen tests, take a look at the results, process that through natural language processing or similar, and be able to prompt and say, okay, so which vulnerabilities have been the most persistent for our organization? And how much is it going to cost, assuming that my IT support guy is $75 an hour to remediate some of these issues, right? So you're going to be able to do some really cool stuff in the near future. So you're going to see a lot of that. We're also going to see a lot of organizations moving into passwordless, right? So passwordless authentication, using either your mobile device or even a security key as an
Mhm.
alternative, to deal with the phishing problem. Um, Endpoint detection. I mentioned a little bit with AI. You're going to see
Mhm.
endpoint protection getting better and better. There's some companies out there. I don't want to really mention their names right now, but they're doing amazing work in that space. Um, and then finally, let's talk about the attacker side.
Yeah.
The attackers are going to attack. They're always going to target what really makes the most sense to them. Um, if you make EDR nearly impossible for them to kind of to breach or deal with in a post attack scenario, um, then what you might see is more on the social engineering on the human side, right? If social engineering on the human side gets more difficult as more technical controls are implemented and more organizations becoming more secure, then you might see the use of more 0 days, getting access to external assets, and then being able to compromise elements of the internal network. So that leads me to finally, um, zero trust. Again, I may have mentioned before, but zero trust was actually, I was making reference to it earlier,
Yeah.
Andrew, right? We talk about buzzwords. Zero trust for a minute, I'm sure we could agree, was kind of like a buzzword scenario.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
what we're seeing is a lot of companies, big shout out to these companies, they're coming out with very cool products to kind of deal with zero trust or help you implement some of it. Okay. I know it's complicated for some organizations where they have a massive network, they have Active Directory, 50,000 employees, a whole bunch of forests. That would be like the opposite of a zero trust environment. So organizations are working on products or solutions to kind of add on top of that, or even even implements their solution prior to getting access to one of those services. I guess the point is we're much better off than we were 10, 20 years ago. There's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that we'll get there over time. So that's what I'm seeing right now.
I mean, I even go back to like when I was a data center architect. If you'd asked me if everything in my data center was patched and hardened and up to date, ooh, I don't like that question. Right? We keep building more stuff, we add more, and we build higher and higher stacks of infrastructure. And so the reality is that there's going to be holes. There's going to be little areas that people
Oh
can
yeah.
monetize and focus on. So let me flip it around then to some of what Pure has been doing here in this space. And this is going to be a lightning round, by the way. I want to definitely recommend some previous and future tech talks. We'll go deep in.
Mhm.
We mentioned safe mode based on the worsening ransomware landscape. This is now the protection against even administrative compromise, or even it could be the accidental admin too, who does stuff you don't need to. So this is actually making safe mode on by default, and it's an opt out. But it even can be granular to per array. So there's some details here about, so immutable snapshots automatically, existing volumes and policies aren't modified. And then you can opt out if you want to, but we've seen enough cases, and sadly, where people are like, man, I wish I'd known about this. And it's like, we've been trying to shout some of this stuff from the rooftops, but we're moving safe mode on flash array to a default on, and you can opt out, still with light operational overhead. Even pieces around visibility. So out of Pure One, there's a data protection assessment. We launched this recently, or a major new version of that incorporates resiliency score, which gives you a sense of which of the pure security features that you're actually leveraging and focusing on. Sometimes this gives good visibility across the board of what pure capabilities you're using or not. I know I recognize when things are red or yellow, it always makes you like, oh, come on, really? But just gives you visibility. Related to that, another thing we'll often hear is, hey, if we're using snapshots, even if they're better than average snapshots, what snapshots want to be when they grow up, they're pointer based, they don't take space when you make them, et cetera. Well, they do take space as they diverge from the baseline. So actually helping people, sometimes tactically, people get stuck in a little bit of paralysis analysis about, hey, what's the space consumption going to be? Now, newsflash, anything that you spend on extra capacity for snapshots will be far less than the impact of a ransomware attack. So I usually try and put that perspective out there, but you do need to be able to plan and model things out. Next, there's only two more. Also, and this is one actually where I have some patents around this one, where we've done some really hard work around detecting major changes in volume level data reduction ratios. Pure flash array is a data reducing array. Inline deduplication post compression, as well as inline deduplication and compression, as well as post process. When there's a major change in the data reduction ratio on a volume, it's something that isn't inherently a ransomware thing. It might just be a SQL DBA who's decided to encrypt his backups. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. That's good for an operations person, someone in operations to know regardless. But it's also a great indicator if someone's writing encrypted data to an array of ransomware attack. Now, to be very real, This is not necessarily meant to say to detect a ransomware attack. You should have other things doing that, or maybe your phone's ringing off the hook anyway because the applications are going down. This, at least in the initial version, but even long term, will help you with say, I can reduce recovery times by choosing the best first item to recover from. I don't have to guess at this snapshot, et cetera, because we don't have to bring all the data back from backup with snapshots. It's instant to recover from a snapshot in an offline environment where you clean things out. But I can have a better chance of what's the first one that I should try or the second one, because you can see when the data reduction ratios start to change majorly. And then last but not least, sometimes the problem is you have an infected array, or well, not infected. The array is maybe not infected, but you have encrypted data on it, and your cybersecurity insurance agency or other folks or your legal or forensic team say you can't touch that. It's a crime scene. Hey, I'm ready to recover, and I don't have anything to recover to. That sucks, right? Chicken and egg problem. So what we've actually introduced, well, for even through COVID, we've kept very short supply chain times, and frankly, I've had sales teams at AEs and SEs and Pure that have been kind of in hero mode to ship arrays quickly. If you're an Evergreen One customer, that's our storage subscription service, you can add on an SLA where we stand behind saying, if you have some of this stuff set up, you have to set the safe mode and snapshots as part of the signing up for the SLA. We will get you a clean array within next business day. The asterisk is only for outside the U.S., right? Hopefully most folks listening are inside the U.S. And then we will actually provide a professional services engineer to help make sure the array is stood up, and then you can start restoring. And there's some guarantees around data transfer rate as far as what we can handle. It's not saying what your infrastructure is set up for to restore back to, kind of thing. So hopefully you get a sense of each one of these. I could spend 10 minutes on, but we keep thinking through the different pieces within this space. So it's not just, you need to think about resiliency architecture, but there's layers of depth here and capabilities we keep adding and offering. Anything you want to comment on there, Hector? I appreciate you letting me go into monologue mode, but I was like, if I toss it to you for each one of these, we won't make it through. So any closing thoughts to bring us home?
Yeah, that was fantastic. And I love the concept. I mean, you've done great work, Andrew. Big shout out to you. But I love the concept of the DRR, anomaly detection, or anomaly reporting, because we don't have to call it detection, right?
Yeah.
But it could be detection, right?
Yeah.
But this is fantastic, right? Because imagine a scenario where your organization is breached and there's unfortunately a ransomware campaign. Um, Remember, you have to do incident response, and incident response is essentially an investigation, aside from recovery and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, going by this here alone, during the investigation, you would be able to identify when the volume started changing.
Accelerate the investigation.
That's exactly right. I think that's really cool. I know I'm on the offensive side, and the work you guys do is mostly on the defensive side. But it even, the one thing I tell folks, especially those of audience, please, if you guys are doing security research, even if you guys are pen testers or on the defensive side, it's really important that you start to understand, the defensive needs, the capabilities, right? Like Andrew just proposed here, on the defensive side, because it allows you to better understand the overall picture as an offensive researcher. The same applies for if the conversation was switched around and Andrew's wants to learn about the offensive side, then I would say, hey, Andrew, it's time to do some offensive work, some pen testing, some research. Let's do a session together. And now he's getting perspective. So I just want to share that with the audience, because I'm hoping that aside from potential clients here, you have people that are interested in cybersecurity in general, right? And hopefully the security engineers like that little bit. So big shout out to them.
And I realize it, and maybe if I can, I almost hate to do this, but what you're focusing on, I know a good bit of that. I'm going to put this in the chat here. You've got a regular podcast, Hacker in the Fed, with your good friend. Anything else in maybe 60 seconds, if I can impose on it that way, if I'm kind of current and future focus for Hector?
Yeah, I appreciate you, buddy. So yeah, I do have the podcast, Hacker in the Fed. Is with the FBI agent that actually arrested me, and a good friend, Chris Tarbell. You get to hear both the perspective of law enforcement and myself. I have a feature film coming out over the next 2 years. Hopefully, you guys get to watch that in the movies.
Cool.
And then I'm just kind of building products and doing cool things.
Consulting. You do a lot of
Consulting.
consulting.
Oh yeah, I do a lot of consulting and everything from pen testing to cyber risk and education. And hopefully, and of course, doing really cool things with Pure. Pure has been such a great partner and great friend of mine over the last several years. So big shout out to you guys.
Likewise. Thank you. And we'll come back in a minute to your bio slide just so people can find you on LinkedIn and Twitter. But as always, the time goes way too fast. Thank you for being such a great guest. I really appreciate it for the level of knowledge and depth, even as we were bouncing around on a bunch of different topics. In case you stayed around for the drawing, hey, here we are. You know,
All right.
we made sure to get it in. So maybe that's why I stayed. So the Ember 12-ounce travel mug, it's a retail value of $130. Today's winner is Tom G from Colorado. So, Tom, we will be reaching out to you. Thank you for staying around. Please make sure to join us next month. I'll be joined with Ratinder as we'll be going into DevSecOps and how you build secure products and what that means. This will actually be a pretty deep session. And I want to make sure here that as we go, right, I shouldn't forget the poll. So let's close out the third poll here. We're wrapping up here, but we're always kind of hanging out. So I'm going to close the third poll and share it back here. And then we'll do the fourth final poll here. So interestingly, this is a fairly balanced set of answers, Hector, I think, around focus on prevention versus recovery. 41% balance, some focused on recovery, some prevention. And then the number of copies, obviously, it's either kind of 2 or maybe 3 copies of the data, but there are some that are doing 4 copies in a bunker. So,
Wow.
any thoughts there? I'll let you riff on that too if you want. So, please.
Yeah, no, I mean that's fantastic. I mean, the more the better, right? I'm sure there's people out there still with tape desks, rather tape drives and a bunch of tapes just in case, the worst case scenario. No, I mean that's I think the question in regards to, how do you balance based off your security budget, right? We all know, we know this, Andrew, that a lot of
So much to
organizations,
do.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much to do and there's only so much time that the budget could afford. And this, sometimes companies get budgets for an entire year. They might have a quarterly budget or bi-monthly budget. I mean, I've seen the craziest scenarios, but the one thing I'll say is, as you're kind of building out your security program, you want to focus on prevention. You want to focus on, and there's some great questions here too, I see. You want to focus on your backup solutions and asset management and all the different things, security in depth, right? Um, within your boundaries. And of course, finally, education. This was a great conversation. You see a lot of folks in the chat,
So much
you
good
know,
chat.
they
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed it. Absolutely. And I hope that we have more of these for sure, because so it was a great session.
I was totally listening to you, and at the same time, I was launching poll number 4, kind of thing. So,
I saw that.
and this is a little bit more. You're like, yeah, I like that. So, this is a little bit more just not it's housekeeping, but we're continuing to think about how we evolve this format. So, periodically at the end of these, tossing in, do you watch recording, on demand, etc. And with that, we've got just a couple minutes left. So, I'm going to do. I think I may cherry pick one. Well, actually, I'll cherry pick a question here,
Okay.
Hector, unless you have one that you see in the Q&A that you want to answer. It actually already hit a little bit on AI being used for cyber attacks.
Yeah.
So I think maybe actually I'm going to go back to Mr. Widget. He was listed as a guest here, but if folks want to get started with security, are there any coding languages that you recommend today? Or let me maybe even generalize that a little bit. Hey,
Sure.
someone wants to get started in this field. Where do you recommend they look at and to do?
Okay. So the field is very broad. The cybersecurity industry is huge, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that you can do. The one thing that I want you guys to really keep in mind is that at the very least, you should have some sort of operating system that you feel comfortable with. Yes, you can use Windows for your main or Mac OS as your main system, but having a good understanding of Linux is going to go very far for you. It's going to
Yeah.
help you a lot, guys. Okay. So don't be scared to set up Ubuntu or Kali, and you don't even need to use Kali. You can use Ubuntu or Red Hat or whatever's available to you. Trust me, it's going to take you far. As for programming language, I want to answer that question.
Mm.
Um, if you're developing tools, tools like scripts, Bash for Unix and Linux works. Python works very well. But the one thing that I will say, folks, is that if you want to get a better understanding of web applications, modern web applications, you want to learn Node.js and JavaScript, 100%. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to continue your career in cybersecurity, what do you need to know? You need to know the basics of networking. So you should be able to answer what is a three-way handshake. And you should know the difference between TCP/IP and UDP. Okay. And you should be able to understand the OSI layers and how they work. Okay. And then as you get into security, you want to learn, go to OWASP.org and look at the OWASP top 10 security vectors in areas of research. Trust me, you don't have to be a super hacker. So long as you understand these base concepts, you're gonna
Mm.
do very well in your career path.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to do a little bit of, there's a question here about global safe mode, protecting deleted volumes and
Mhm.
volume groups. Yes, safe mode in general, global safe mode helps with any unintended deletion of data. So we've actually thought through even like doing things like reducing snapshot schedules or disabling snapshots kind of thing. And then there was even some questions about integration with Veeam and Cohesity. There's some really deep integration with Veeam. We have Flash Recover with Cohesity. So if you have questions on those, I think with Seth, we didn't get to those because, man, there's never enough time. Please feel free to reach out to your account team as with Pure, and we're more than happy to dive deep into that. I think with that, Hector, we are actually 1 minute over, but we still have 1,400 folks still hanging out with us. So there's a piece of me that feels like we ought to keep it going, but it's
Yeah,
time to. So I want to be respectful of your time because really, really appreciate you joining today.
it's all good, brother. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and a big shout out to everybody here that joined us.
Awesome. So, in case you didn't catch it, please make sure to join us next month for building security and from day one, the pervasive, pervasive impact of DevSecOps. I'll be joined by Ratinder. Hector, thank you again, and to everyone who joined us this month. Hope you enjoyed the coffee break, learned something worthwhile. We'll look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great day.